I'm Adam Gray, head coach of Pyrobotics. Teamwork, team up, team awesome this next year, unless they decide to change their names. I help out with Brentwood Elementary and some of the other elementary schools and private teams here surrounding Plainfield, Indiana, on the west side of Indianapolis. Jake?
Yeah, I'm Jake Simons, Director of Robotics for Wani Community Schools, nestled up in Napanee, Indiana, Amish community, which is pretty cool. We have 15 teams. I'm also a head coach of the Woodview Eaglebots, the 2019 World Champion Excellence winners. I'm excited to go through the game manual with you, man. We did this last year, and I felt like it was really beneficial to a lot of coaches, a lot of teams, a lot of kids. And so excited to go through this game Slapshot with you, man.
Yeah, I'm super excited. It was a really good exercise last year, and the year before that, I really wish we had recorded that one because that was really helpful for me personally and my teams. So I know that I get a lot out of this, so I hope all of you can get some really good stuff out of this as well. Maybe be a little bit easier way to take in the game manual and see what some of the changes are and understand kind of what's going on. But before we get kind of to that, we kind of like to speculate a little bit throughout the year. And my first speculation about this game, before we even heard the name, was terrain. Like, I really wanted some like things to have to drive over and climb up on and everything. And I was like way off. So did you have any ideas or predictions this time around?
I was kind of hoping, I didn't have any predictions, but I was kind of hoping for like a multi-layer, multi-level type of structure where you had to drive up different layers and levels and capture different things that were up there. So obviously it was wrong with that too, but I'm really excited about this. Obviously, when the teaser came out a few weeks ago, Slapshot, I think it was pretty obvious that we were going to be using discs or pucks of some sort. I mean, that was obvious, right?
Yep.
The game, man, when they did reveal it eventually, I think it blew a lot of people away. We were both at the World Championship when they revealed it, and man, there is nothing like the in-person reveal at the World Championship. It is just amazing. The kids go nuts.
You know what comes next. It's time.
An exciting reveal. I think all the kids that I've talked to in our organization are excited about the game. We had our awards ceremony last night, actually, and I just we had the game out. We had already pre-ordered it and picked it up at Worlds, and the kids were just so excited, kind of playing with the different discs and looking at how the dispensers worked and all that. So what were your thoughts on that?
Oh, I was super excited. And like you said, the production value and the production quality of the actual release and reveal of it was just phenomenal. I really liked how they gave us the name early. Like, it's enough to like whet your appetite and like, okay, I think I kind of have an idea of what it is. And then you get to see like, was I really thinking along the same lines as them? I'm sure Grant was having a blast up there. That looked like so much fun. Come out with just a couple of discs hidden and you can hold them up with all the fire and smoke, and it looked like so much fun. My kids were definitely so excited that one of the dads bought a game there for his son because they have a field at home, so they were going to buy it anyway. And I had already pre-ordered long before they had the option to pick it up at Worlds. So I was like, well, I'll just get it when I get home and I'll be fine. But since the dad bought it, he's like, hey, if you want to like open this up and take a look, you could just give me the box that you have at home and we'll just trade. Because they flew down, and I don't know that they were going to get a box all the way home because I would probably have to take it back for them anyway because we drove. So I was like, yeah. So I put out a little call to some of my kids, and I'm like, hey, they want to put the game together? And like, I had a room full of kids super excited to check out the new game, see what the discs are like, try and put everything together. Lo and behold, there were no instructions. So
you put that together just based on the video pictures, right?
Yeah. So we got the yellow dispenser almost completely built. We got the blue dispensers almost completely built. The biggest difference between the videos and the instructions is that some of the pieces are different colors. So we did what we could. Obviously, building the purple one from the video is really difficult with the gearing that is in there. So we didn't really bother with that one, but we got the yellow one pretty much. It was really close. it was functional, just it was built a little bit differently. So the next day after elementary finally revealed and we got the instructions, we were able to put it together, like following the actual instructions. But my kids were super excited about the game. Like they didn't even want to, well, they did want to go back and compete, but they didn't want to wait to finish competing to build the new game.
Yeah, that was, I wouldn't say a downfall, because I love that they revealed it at, the end of the middle school closing ceremonies, but so I wouldn't call it a downfall, but
No.
all of my kids were definitely, all my elementary kids definitely lost a little bit of focus after that, because it was just like, they're just so, I cannot tell you how many kids came up to me and my assistants and even like our adult chaperones that were there that were just, they were coming up with all these different ideas. And I was like, guys, these are all amazing. I love that your gears are spinning. I love that. But let's focus. We have a match in about 3 minutes. Let's focus on that. And then we can start talking design ideas for next year.
Yeah. Why aren't you queued yet? So I know I had several kids starting to fill up sketchbooks on their way home. So I've got first official, well, it's kind of the last official practice of pitching in tomorrow night, where we will drive the old robots on the new game. So my two sons have already driven their robots on the new game. Just to, we always do that because it kind of shows you have to build a custom robot every year. And it's always fun to see like, okay, well, what if we just stuck with what we had? How many points could we score? And they were able to get like, I think solo like in the 30s, and then together they were able to get 47, I think.
I saw you using your high hang to knock off some of those dispensers, and then using your intake to the purple dispenser. So that was pretty clever.
So it was clever, and it was really nice for them to finally have a game where they can score some points with the old robot, because in years past, like, it was not adequate whatsoever. And if you scored 1 or 2 points, you were thrilled because there was no way it was going to work.
Right.
So
I have a question before we move on. So you've already put the field together. We have not. I had another coach put it together, and I didn't ask him, but what was the time frame for putting together? Because I know with pitching in, I mean, let me just flat out say this. I wanted pitching in to be as complex as it was as far as field design, because I feel like the more complex it is, the cooler it is, the more enticing it is and exciting it is. And so, but at the same time, it took us like 4 or 5 hours, 2 kids to put that together. So what was this one like?
So it was not that bad. It can be if you're building it on your own. So we built it twice. Obviously, the first time we had to disassemble what we did, trying to build it according to the video first before we got started again. But we built in parallel. So each person had a device, and they just like, I'm going to do the blue towers, I'm going to do the yellow, I'm going to do the purples. So we were able to build those in parallel, and that went pretty quickly. That was like 1 hour and 45, 2 hours thereabouts. Granted, experienced builders, really excited to be building it. Their thumbs weren't sore yet from all the 0x2 connector pins. So after you build like 2, 3, 4, 5 of them, like, you're going to be sore. It's going to take a while. The second one we built at Brentwood, we did more linear, top to bottom, right from the beginning of the instruction manual to the end, myself and my 2 sons. And it took us about 2.5 hours. So we were also racing to try and get it done fast. So take that a little bit with a grain of salt. I was seeing some people saying it was taking them 3.5 hours by themselves. So expect probably about 3.5 hours if you're doing it just straight through. I know one person was kind enough to split up the manual into separate PDFs of sections on Facebook, if you can find that. If not, I'll put a link in the description here so that you can get all the individual PDFs for each of the parts. I highly recommend, if you've got the people, build it in parallel. It'll go a lot faster, especially if you have 10 fields to build. So we've got 3 more to put together, and we may do it sometime this summer. We'll see.
We've got our summer camp we got to prepare for. So
yep,
but that's July. So we got a month or so. It's a month and a half to take care.
Plenty of time.
Yeah,
plenty of time. Cool.
Okay, so do you want to share the actual game reveal, Slapshot?
Welcome to the 2022-2023 game VEX IQ competition, Slapshot. VIQC Slapshot is played on a 6-foot by 8-foot field. This field contains 5 dispensers, 45 discs, 1 fence, and 4 goal zones. The scoring objects in VIQC Slapshot are orange plastic discs, approximately 2.5 inches in diameter and 0.5 inches tall. Robots begin the match contacting the field perimeter wall that is furthest from the fence. In this area, robots will be interacting with 3 types of dispensers. Each dispenser has a unique mechanism that robots can activate to remove discs. Each disc that is removed from a dispenser is worth 1 point. Discs can be scored by launching them under the fence and into the goal zones. There are 4 goal zones: a 2-point zone, 3-point zone, 4-point zone, and 1-point zone. Robots are not permitted to cross the fence while scoring discs, so they'll need to be accurate and precise if they want to score the most points possible. But that's not all. At the end of the match, robots will get a chance to stretch up over the fence and reach for the contact zones which border the field. If a robot is able to touch down in one of these contact zones, then each disc that is scored in the corresponding goal zone will be worth 1 extra bonus point.
So at least during the reveal, when they showed this video, my favorite part was when they're like, a 2-point zone, a 3-point zone, a 4-point zone, and a 1-point zone.
And the crowd like went, oh!
Yeah.
I was going to say that too, man. That was the first thing I was going to mention after this video was that, the crowd's reaction to the scoring zones is, and I love that. I mean, it's pretty cool that they did that.
Well, it's just like what they did with VRC with Spin Up. It's, if you miss your shots, it falls into a scoring zone for the other alliance. So having some sort of penalty for not being accurate, like you still get points, just not as many.
I think you and I had talked about when the VRC game had been released the week before IQ. I liked that element where you actually can get points for the other team by being inaccurate. And I was like, oh, that's not even possible in IQ because we're working together. So I wonder how they would be able to do that. And they did that. I mean, that's definitely their intention there.
Yep.
Yeah. The other thing that I thought too was, we only have half of a field to drive on.
Yes.
And in that half of a field, there are a bunch of obstructions. And so driving, like your robot's going to have to be pretty slim and pretty petite, I think, in order to get through all of those little, even just between like the blue dispenser and the purple dispenser, there's not much room there.
There's not.
So put 2 robots on the field then, and it's going to get pretty tight pretty quick. And so this game, I feel like, is definitely more design centered than it is drive centered. And obviously, you need to be good at both, but there's not going to be a bunch of driving around because there's just no room to do that. So I thought that was pretty interesting too.
Yep. Well, especially when we were testing with our pitching in robots on here, there is no room for the enormous pitching in robots. Like, even though they're short, like they take up a huge amount of footprint. So, I fully expect towers to get knocked over.
Yes.
Throughout the year, especially by the end of the year when those 0x2 pins are just not quite cutting it anymore. It may be a good idea to have some extras on hand, some brand new ones to swap later on if you're an event partner and you're running competitions, because that's going to be interesting. That's definitely one of my questions, because field damage is one of those things where, is that a DQ? Or do you get a replay? They
did a replay in the IQ World Championship Finals because of field flaw. So
but was that a robot caused field flaw, or was that a staff caused field flaw? Or was it just not noticed?
But you know what though, we had the same concerns too with the plastic sheet for pitching in and ours. We beat the heck out of ours, and it never. It finished the season strong, so we might have the same results here. The other thing I was going to say too is going along the lines of having 2 robots on a field like this is communication more than ever is going to be extremely important, especially if both of you are getting up to the shooting zone at the same time, because even that area is pretty tight, and you can't be shooting your discs in the same exact spot every single time, you're going to have to kind of move a little bit so that they're not knocking each other out of the different scoring zones. And so there's not a ton of room, and you're going to have to communicate a lot with each other, especially when you're both back at the starting positions against the wall there.
Yep. And even beyond that, it's, if you're going to try to avoid a messy floor with discs all over the place, you're going to probably want to try and catch them somehow. And it may be that whatever mechanism you come up with to do that may require the other team to activate the dispenser so that you can catch them. So there is a lot of really interesting teamwork aspects that can be had in this that we definitely didn't have necessarily in pitching in. We had a little bit where we could, push balls over to one side for the other team. We could bring balls to the other side, but I really like how this is much more deliberately teamwork focused, strategy focused, along with a certain amount of randomness in how the scoring is going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the element of luck is going to be exciting, because anybody can win. Obviously, the better designs and better drivers are going to be at the top, but you're shooting your pucks, your discs, and knocking them out of the 4-point zones, and anybody can win. I think part of it too was they wanted to make a perfect score unattainable or almost unattainable.
Yeah.
Like this seems. If you think about it, man, 45 discs fitting in that 4-point zone. I don't know.
They do fit.
I'm sure they do fit, but do they fit when you're shooting?
I mean, probably not.
So
I'm not saying it's impossible, but it is got to be very, very difficult, if not nearly impossible, which is great because honestly, as much as I loved pitching in, is a really fun game. When you're watching the finals, especially middle school finals, and a team misses a shot into the low goal and everybody's just like, it's over. They've lost. Like, that's a super bummer. So it's really nice to have something like this where you don't know if you've lost. So you definitely still have something to continue playing for, do your best the whole way through all 60 seconds. So I'm really excited about that too.
Yep. First impressions, man, I'm really excited. And the more I've processed it, the more excited I've gotten about it. I think it's going to be a really good game. I think it's going to be a good game.
I agree. So let's dive into the game manual and see some of the particulars here. So first thing you notice, this is version 0.1. There will be updates. There were last year. There will be again. But hopefully they've covered a lot of the things that we may have a lot of serious questions about up front. It seemed like they did, and we'll kind of get to that as we go. So it starts out table of contents as always. But one thing that they did that I really like, so changelog is after that, is they gave us this quick reference guide with all of the rule numbers all together, easily referenced. You can click on these if you're on the web version, and it'll take you to the pertinent section. Makes it a lot easier to get around and actually read the rules, especially if your kids need to contest a ruling at an event. They can reference the rule directly, easily find it, and not have any issues with communication with the referees or the judges or the head referee.
Yep, that was a good addition there.
So section 1 talks about the game. Very similar as in the past. It just, it's a 6x8 field. It's going to stay a 6x8 field for probably forever, at least for quite a while. Talks about the discs, talks about teamwork, talks about skills, 60 seconds, and so on and so forth. Goal to score as many points as possible. So the note from the GDC, I like that they have this up front, because one of the things that we tend to see often is questioning of rules and trying to determine if something is legal or not. And they've said in the past, and they've had it in game manuals in the past, that the game manual can only tell you what you must do and what you must not do. And anything that is not in the game manual as a must not do is therefore allowed. And there seems to be continually an awful lot of reading between the lines and fabrication of rules due to misunderstandings of the rules. So I really like that they have this note up front. How do you read this game manual? The game manual can only tell you what you cannot do and what you must do. It can't cover the fuzzy things in between. So if it's not in the game manual as illegal, then it's probably allowed.
Yeah. Well, they even said when exploring a new game, please approach this game manual with that mentality and look at the rules as constraints. I mean, that's,
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's important that they put that there.
Absolutely. It's something definitely for your teams to keep in mind as they start their season. One of the first things you should be putting in your notebook are the game and the rules and the constraints that your robot is being held to, because that determines what your engineering and what your design is going to be. So definitely start here, start with that mentality and write it down in your notebook.
Yep. Then of course they have the updates of the specific dates when they'll be updating the rules and different things based on the Q&A forum and different strategies or videos or whatever that have come out. And so I don't think they've had that before too, have they?
They had the schedule last year. It was the first year, I believe, that they had the schedule of updates. Okay. They have updated in the past, but there were no planned updates. They just kind of came out as they were needed. So last year was the first year we were like, yeah, those dumper bots are probably going to be made illegal. And you can look in here and see. So like version 1.0, version 2.0 may include gameplay or rule changes inspired by early season events. These are the dates that you need to be aware of where the game rules may change dramatically. Same thing with this January 31st. These are major revisions. So serious things can change.
Right, because and I think that's really important to note, because last year, because of those dump bots, they were collecting all 22 or maybe half the field in the forum. There were I'll never forget, there were a handful of people in the forums or the Facebook groups or whatever that several weeks and months after that update had found out that their robot was no longer legal, and they had spent a lot of their season building and designing that robot. And so that's a huge bummer, because now you got to start from scratch and make sure you're complying with the rules and all that. So.
Yep. So for all your coaches out there, put these dates in your calendar, double check them, and make sure you're kind of putting a finger on the pulse of what's going on. Because so last year with the dump bots being made illegal in August, my team, that's what their design was right from day one. When we saw the game, we saw that there's nothing prohibiting you from just collecting the balls and just dunking them in the basket. So that's what we were building. And as it got closer to August, the writing was kind of on the wall that was going to be made illegal. So we pivoted mid-August, about 2 weeks before they made that rule change. So if you know in advance that these kinds of things can happen and you're able to keep track of kind of what the feeling and consensus is, you can start to predict some of these major changes. Now, that said, right now, I don't foresee there being anything super crazy happening with this game. It's always possible. I can't possibly foresee everything, but there's nothing quite as, at least to me, as obvious as picking up all the balls and dunking them was last year. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think that they've hit a lot of those major things, like, your disc has to go under the bar.
Yep.
So that, picking up and flinging the whole thing across. And also they mentioned, actually, I think Grant talked about it at Worlds at the elementary closing ceremonies. He mentioned the touchdown zones or whatever they're called. If you are touching multiple of those contact zones, then it counts for nothing. So
none of them count.
I think they really tried to think through all the possibilities and between. So.
I mean, time will tell, but so far after reading this, I think they did a really good job of clarifying all of those potential edge cases, and we'll see it as we kind of get through to it. The other thing that they added to the beginning that used to be later on in the document, I really like how they moved this up, is the Q&A system. And it's always been there. It's been one of those things where if you get fatigue from reading a game manual, by the end of it, like, you just don't notice that the Q&A is a thing. And it's always said that the Q&A system is an extension of the game manual. And we've definitely been to a couple of events where they didn't know that the Q&A existed, and they were not accepting, like, even their head referees, their certified head referees were not accepting Q&A. Like, I'm not taking the word of some random website. Like, dude, this is in the game manual. This is part of the game manual. So I really like how they have it up front. It'll be a lot more visible, a lot easier to see, and it gives people a much better chance of asking the questions early on.
Yeah. I mean, it even says where to go and how to find these, and how to specifically post your questions, and what to do before posting your questions and all that. So I think you're right. I think this creates a better guide, I guess, to that community that so many coaches are missing out on.
Yep. I will say that this page specifically doesn't mention it, but if you come up to here, the official Q&A system doesn't open until May 31st. So if you click that link, it's going to 404. It's not going to go anywhere. So you got to wait a little bit as of the recording of this video for May 31st for the QA system to officially open. So
Now into the game definition.
Yep. Adult.
What's an adult? What's an adult, Adam?
An adult is not a student. What can adults not do, Jake?
Well, let's, do you want to scroll down to that specific section or no? Adults cannot build, design, program the robot by themselves. Go down a couple pages there. What page is that?
It's right here.
7, yeah. So last year, and I'm not going to get into the rant this year like we did last year, but we spent a lot of time, and in fact, on my choo-choo mechanism video, I spent a lot of time on this as well, because it's really important. But we have the definition here of a builder and a designer and a programmer. And I can't help but think that the people who create this game manual, the game design committee, saw our video and saw our rant and were like, you know what, we need to make a specific section for this because that was so good. Don't you think that's what happened, Adam?
If you say so.
So basically, the builder, designer, and programmer. I'm going to read. All these definitions are interchangeable. You just change the word builder to designer or programmer. It's the same thing. So the students on the team who assemble the robot or design the robot or code the robot. An adult cannot be the builder on a team. That seems like common sense, right? Adults are permitted to teach the builders or designers or programmers associated concepts, but may never work on the robot without the builders, designers, programmers present and actively participating. And that phrase right there, present and actively participating, is really important because I think a lot of times, there's two extremes, right? And that's why they've come out with the student-centered policy. So you've got your green, your yellow, and your red. Red is obviously the far, far extreme where the adults are literally doing all the work by themselves. Kids aren't even in the room. They're just reliving their glory days as a robotics kid, right? And then just making their kids drive it on a field. That is wrong. That is against the rules. That is against the student-centered policy, and that's against what this is saying right here.
And it's harmful to your kids because they're here to learn. So don't take that away from them.
Right. And then on the flip side, the green side, which is permissible and okay and acceptable, is basically just like all hands off, just complete independence. And let me just say this about the student-centered policy. Right there in the middle, smack dab in the middle, the yellow section, which is still considered permissible and acceptable in the student-centered policy. That is where you kind of want to be at a younger age. And as the kids get older, I think you start heading towards the green, kind of releasing a little bit more. You've taught them those concepts. They're starting to understand, gear ratios and different types of mechanisms and all that stuff on their own because you've taught it. And one of the things the game manual really hits hard is kids are not born natural engineers. They just aren't. They don't understand those concepts right out of the womb. And so it's our job as coaches and as adults and as mentors and teachers to teach these concepts, as this says, to teach associated concepts, but we're not building them. We can build prototypes and show them how a mechanism works, and kind of like my choo-choo mechanism
For sure.
video, had a couple of those as well. But as long as we're not showing them that and then just attaching it to their robot to use in a match, then that's good. And so you want to make sure, depending on what the level of knowledge that your students have, stay within the green and yellow section of that student-centered policy. But right there, without the builders, designers, and programmers present and actively participating.
Yep. And there are definitely times where you're going to be able to get in there and teach, show them the mechanisms. There's even times where they're physically not capable of detaching or attaching a pin or something.
Chains are so hard for those kids, man.
Yes.
They're hard for me because I got fat thumbs. But yeah, I mean, there are times when that is okay. It's your intent to be right. And so that's what's important. I'll never forget, man. And this isn't to talk poorly about someone, but I knew someone one time that was just like, they were too far into the green, and they just said, hey, I just like to grade papers and sit back at the table while they're just exploring. I was like, I understand your intent behind that, but you're also a math teacher. And as far as I know, you aren't just giving them a bunch of numbers and then sitting back and letting them explore with those numbers, right? Like, there has to be a level of teaching and coaching involved, because they don't know that stuff naturally. And so that's where we kind of stick in the yellow of the student-centered policy there. And as they get older, kind of start morphing towards the green.
Exactly.
There you go. Boom. So, all right. Off the rant. That was a little bit longer than I thought. I'm sorry.
It's all good. That's like, honestly, the game is important. All the rules are important, but that one is more than the game. That one's your kid's future. That's their education. That's the things that they're learning, that they're taking away from this. They can go out and get trophies in anything. Like, you can go buy them trophies, like, if you want them to have trophies, but for them to come in and actually learn something and progress along this path is priceless. So don't take that away from them. Help them through it, teach them the things that they need to learn, and step back and be amazed, because they're going to kill it. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah. It's amazing what kids are capable of doing with good structure and good guidance. And obviously both of our teams and organizations have strong engineering notebooks and are really good at interviewing. And so that's part of their learning process as well. And also covering their trails and proof that they are in fact the main builders and designers and programmers. So what other definitions we have here?
Well, I can see a couple of them that are kind of important. The one that jumps out to me the most is driver station, singular.
Yeah. Thank goodness, man.
One driver station, people. Just one.
Yep.
Please note that it's on this side of the field. It's not on this side of the field. So if your kids are standing in the driver's station and the scoring area is to their left, it's wrong.
Yeah, that's going to be messed up at a lot of events, I think.
Yep. Fortunately, just a polite notice and letting them know should resolve the issue. We've been to events before where the fields were a little bit wrong here and there, and so we have gotten in the habit of going and just checking, make sure everything's where it's supposed to be. And event partners have always been super gracious with us when we have found issues. When we've hosted events, we've had issues, and I've specifically gone to teams that I knew are strong programs. I'm like, hey, would you come and please check our fields to make sure that there's nothing that's out of place? And they found some things before. So always be willing to accept correction when things are wrong, and actively seek it out if you can.
Yeah. And on top of that, back to what you're saying, it's one driver station this year. Back to what it used to be. I know there was a couple of people were questioning that in the Facebook groups already. But that's how it's always been until COVID hit. And so that's understandable why they had different options or opposite sides, 6-foot sides or whatever. And yet last year, obviously they then allowed both options, and then it was confusing. And we even had actually one team specifically come up to us at Worlds this year and told us that it was only on the 6-foot sides. I think I came straight to your pits and was like, dude, we haven't been practicing that. Like, I don't know what to do. He even showed me in the manual, but it wasn't the updated man. It was just a mess. So I'm glad we're back to just
Yep.
one driving station that definitely helps with, driving and muscle memory and,
Absolutely.
perspective of where you're standing and what you're looking at. And so that's why it's important to what you said, like making sure that the field is the correct way, because imagine practicing the correct way and then you go to a competition and it's opposite. That messes with drivers.
Absolutely. And again, like, be sure to have your kids practice from both sides here, because they may have to be the ones that have to be over here in the scoring zone and look back across the field.
That's an interesting point too.
In fact, I would almost recommend that you make your kids practice over here so that they can be the ones to volunteer for that handicap, essentially. Like, it's not necessarily a handicap, because maybe you have a better visibility to this other side because you don't have things in the way. But it's definitely something to consider.
We practice that for even pitching in. I know you could start, there's 8 different starting positions or whatever, but we definitely practiced having, from the opposite 8-foot side, having a robot starting there, because that is harder. That's definitely harder to see through the high goal and the low goal there. And so, yeah, that's a good point, man. Make sure you're seeing different spots.
That was definitely what I had my kids do for pitching in, is like, I want you practicing the hardest way possible, because if it's easier, then it's just easy. So be the one that's willing to step up and take that, possibly lesser position, so that the other team can have, a better chance to help you throughout your match.
Yeah. What about the driver definition there? If you go a sentence or two, and it says up to 2 team members per team may fulfill this role on a given match.
So technically it's always been that way. There are rules we'll see later that if you have one driver, that they have to follow. And there has always been provisions for that in the game manual, even before COVID. So like, it's not actually any different than what we've had before. So we'll see that when we get to it. Yeah. One thing that it's always been there, but we've never really focused on it much before, is this disqualification. And we saw it a lot at Worlds. The most common thing that teams were getting disqualifications for was not switching on time. So we were seeing some teams get zeros because they were waiting until 24 or 23 seconds to change controllers. So be sure that you're on top of that, the controller switch. We'll see here later on a little bit more about disqualifications and like the resolution for some of these issues that can arise. So they seem to be emphasizing this part of the game a lot more this year.
Field element, perimeter, floor.
This is all pretty much the same. License plate is the same. So
I do like this table right here though, because obviously there's a lot of things. How long have you been coaching, Adam? 4 years now?
As a head coach, this will be year 5, I think. And then as a just team mentor, assistant, 2 years before that. So 7.
Okay. So I've been doing it for 6 years too. So there's a lot of things that we understand and we know now that we kind of take for granted. But I'll be honest, man, in my first year, this table would have been so nice to see because skills just in general. I'll never forget, man. I think it was my 3rd year, I went to a competition and we went to go do skills. And my driver came back to me. I didn't go with him, but my driver came back to me, or my programmer came back to me, I'm sorry, and was like, we're not allowed to do programming. And I was like, what? Why not? And they're like, they said we're not allowed to do programming here. We're only doing skills. I was like, okay, that doesn't make sense, but whatever. And it was, God bless them. It was their first time hosting and whatever. And so, very politely said, skills, and then there's programming, and then there's driving. There's 2 different. So this table right here, if you're a beginner coach or even beginner students looking through this game manual, check this out. Teamwork challenge. Obviously, you get a minute. You get a minute for all of these. But teamwork matches, you are paired with another alliance and working together. And then your
Yep.
driver skills, 1 minute, you still have your two drivers. And then programming skills, it's just your robot, your programmers, still 1 minute. And I don't know. That would have been nice for me to know because I didn't understand that the first year. And so
Yep.
and I think that's a pretty common misconception for a lot of new coaches
Yep.
and kids.
And to piggyback on that a little bit, with those of you that are brand new to this, the programming aspect of it is prepared ahead of time. While you can make adjustments at the event, the intent is not for you to write the whole program at the event. So you want to have that all done and tested ahead of time. So don't think that part of the programming challenge is actually doing the programming. It's really just running the program on the field during that 1 minute. So I've seen that question a couple of times. I've seen some people ask, do we build our robot at the competition? And like, no. You need to have that built long before that. So same thing with programming. The only other thing I'd add to that is at the events, you will always run into people that have misunderstandings about things, and just understand that these are volunteers. They are not as obsessed with the game and robotics as we are. They're there to help out. A lot of times they're parents or people from the community. They're coming out. They may have gotten some really good training. They may have not gotten as much training as they needed. So always give a little bit of grace and, be willing to explain how things work to them, because this may be their first time ever, and it may be their first and only introduction to robotics ever. And we want this to be a really good experience, even for the volunteers, so that they keep coming back out and volunteering for our events.
Good points, man. Good points. Well, that's the thing too. Just a little side note on that. We had an honors scholar student from DePaul University do their final research thesis on our program, which I thought was really cool. 62 pages.
Wow.
And one of the most important things she noted was the community that robotics created was unlike any other competitive event that she's been a part of before. And, just the camaraderie that different teams had with other teams and coaches and parents and the volunteers. Man, that's the beauty of robotics is we keep things civil, which is not really a societal or a cultural thing anymore. And so make sure we keep it that way. That's the thing that separates robotics from a lot of other things is just the civility and the grace and that camaraderie. So I just thought that was a really neat thing that she noticed. This is a complete stranger to me, and she noticed that at different events that she observed that we went to. So I thought that was pretty
that's
cool.
awesome. So we kind of already looked at this page a little bit, but one thing I did want to call out is a team. 2 or more students make up a team. 2.
Mm-hmm.
There is currently no allowance for single-person teams this year. So who knows what happens later on,
Right.
But for now, 2 or more, just plan on it.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is.
Well, and here's just another quick side note. What do you think is the preferred size? I think VEX has said like 2 to 4 or 2 to 5 or something like that.
I think they say maybe 3 to 5. You're crazy over there. Like, I don't know why you do what you do, but
trying to involve as many kids as you can.
Buy more robots, Jake.
Yeah.
I've had teams anywhere from, so I did have a 1-person team. So when COVID was like raging, my son wanted to still compete, and we just compete out of our basement. And the 2 friends that normally join him, we didn't want to risk anything. They didn't want to risk anything. So he just went through the season on his own that year. Normally he has 2 or 3. I have another 2-person team. My younger son has a 5-person team, and Brentwood has anywhere from 3 to 7-person teams. And in my experience, 3 works really well if you're just working directly with them and more hands-on with teaching them what they need to know. If you're capable of being heavily organized like Jake, then you can probably get away with the 7, 8, 9, 13 kids on a team. I am not nearly that organized. I can't keep control of the situation as well as you can. A classroom teacher is very different than a professional programmer. So,
Well, I mean, all this to say, like, and the reason I asked that is because I don't think there's a right answer, man. Like,
no.
my team here had 9 kids per team, which, and let's be honest, that was a lot. Like, that felt like a lot. But as long as you have stuff for every single kid to be working on, whether it's 3 kids or 9 kids, then it's fine. Keeping the kids engaged and active. We've seen teams like yours have immense success. My teams have had immense success this year, even at the World Championship in their divisions. My red team won the Design Award, and my blue team won the Innovate Award, and that was with 2 9 member teams. And so, as long as you have enough objectives and things for them to be working on, all is good. And so,
that's the part where I fall short a little bit. I'm not quite so highly organized to be able to have things for everybody else to do every practice, or the willingness necessarily to say this practice is only for drivers, this practice is only for programmers. And especially if you're by yourself, if you don't have somebody coming in and helping you manage, that can make it a real challenge. But if you've got some really great volunteer help, some parent help, or if you're just super highly organized and you can give a kid, like, here's your task for the day, or here's the list of things that need to be done, you take it and you organize it and figure out what you need to do today.
Well, and that was a big part of our success this year too, man, is we just had a handful. All the kids were amazing leaders, but we had, a couple kids specifically that really, I mean, they were the coaches, they were the team managers. And I love that, where, beginning of the season, it was hectic, man. Like, it truly was hectic. And then I would say 2-3 months into the season, they just start taking ownership of everything, and you just get to sit back and enjoy the ride. That's the beauty of another one of the beauties of robotics is the development and growth and that eventual release, where you don't have to do much anymore. So,
and when it starts clicking, it's so much fun to watch.
Violations. This is the fun stuff right here. Rules violations. There's minor violations and major violations. Just really quick, how do you want to go through this? You want me to read the?
I mean, we don't need to read the whole thing here. Like, the main issue is what that determines whether something is major or minor is if it affected the score.
Right.
Like, that's kind of all that it is. The only exception to that is the not switching at the driver during the driver switch window. I believe, and there are some, it does say down here, some rules include violation notes in red italicized text to denote special circumstances or to provide additional clarifications. So there are some rules that may have their own set of criteria of what makes it a minor or a major violation. The primary difference between them in terms of results is that a minor infraction gets you a warning and a major gets you a disqualification, which means that your team would get a 0 for the match. The other team will still get the score.
Right.
So it's not a DQ for the entire match. It's just the one team that made the mistake. Many minor infractions for the same thing can become a major violation. So it actually, they have this nice little flow chart. If you want to go through that.
Yeah. So basically, you violated a rule, and just like any typical flow chart, yes or no, follow the path there. So does the rule have specific guidance or examples for major versus minor violations? If yes, then you need to evaluate those according to what the rules are. If no, then was it score affecting? And like Adam said earlier, if yes, then that would be considered a major violation and possibly a DQ, or definitely a DQ there. If no, did it violate G1, S1, or code of conduct? If you are violating those, then yes, that's a major violation and DQ. And if not, has that team or that alliance already received, and like you mentioned, a bunch of minor violations for this specific rule? If yes, then again, DQ. If not, just kind of chill out a little bit. It's a minor violation, formal warning, just kind of ease up a little bit. So it's pretty easy, pretty self-explanatory. Just go through that flow chart if you
Yep. And one thing that this flowchart doesn't really have in it is that the G1S1 code of conduct violations, if they get to the point where they're egregious enough, there will be an escalation to REC from the event partner that's running the event. There will be discussions had, coaches will be contacted and all the like. So there is an escalation path for things like that. But that's not going to happen, right?
That's not going to happen ever in any competition this entire season.
Good. Glad to hear it. Okay, so
I'll let you tackle this one.
Okay, so finally getting into the actual game now that we spent 6 hours talking about everything leading up into it. The contact zone and the contact bonus and the expansion zone. So the colored areas are your contact zones. Those are the things that you can touch that if you are touching at the end of the match, you get a bonus point for every disc that's in that scoring zone. You can only touch them from within the expansion zone. So if your robot is over here, you can't reach out over here and touch the contact zone. That would be illegal and probably a DQ. And I'm not talking blizzards. So you want to be over here and you reach directly over. And we'll see this in the expansion limits later. Expansion is actually limited horizontally only to this zone. So if you're not in this zone, you cannot expand horizontally beyond the 11 by 19 bounds of the robot. So otherwise, you cannot, as the video stated, you cannot reach beyond this fence line. You can't reach beyond the bar. If you're turning by it and you kind of accidentally, like a cable runs over it, like you're not going to get disqualified for that. But if you've got something that goes over and brushes against a disc and pushes it into the blue contact zone from the purple, that may get you DQ'd because it affected the score.
It's also important to note too that you can only be touching down in one of the contact zones, which I think we talked about earlier, and Grant Cox definitely clarified that at the actual closing ceremonies for elementary when they revealed the game again. But you can touching down in one of those contact zones. If you are touching multiple contact zones, you will get 0 bonus points at the end of the match.
Yep. And the one thing that I really want to point out here is this section here. Contact zones are defined as the floor itself. They are not infinitely vertical volumes. So like with pitching in, the low zone was an infinite vertical projection. Whereas the corrals were the balls were, there could be no balls touching the floor inside of the corral. So it's kind of like that distinction, right? So the contact zone, you have to be touching the literal floor in order for it to count. We'll find with the discs that that's a little bit different for the discs. But that's pretty much how this goes. They do cover the multiple zone section later, I believe.
These are the 3 different dispensers that they have. There's actually 5 on the field, but these are the 3 different ones: the yellow one, blue one, and purple one. And you'll definitely, with your students, want to play with those different mechanisms because obviously, as it should be, some are easier to dispense than others. And so that is going to be going through these rules and going through, these different types of things should be the first step that you do before you start designing, because these rules should then guide your design. And so depending on what your kids want to focus on first, that's what your design should gear towards. So you've already put them together. Have you noticed? I mean, I think the blue one is probably, blue and yellow are both pretty simple, right?
Blue and yellow are very simple. Yellow is so easy to dispense that it's actually a little difficult to reset, because as you're putting the discs in, it wants to slide open. So like we had our kids playing with them yesterday at practice, at their last like official practice. And it took them a while to understand, like, no, you have to hold it out while you put the discs in. Otherwise it's just going to make a mess all the time. Additionally, on the yellow ones especially, those discs can fall in between those 2 triangle beams. So be prepared for that.
The purple dispenser, it takes pretty quick rotations for those to come out, and they come out pretty slowly. So there again, just another point of strategy discussion. Do we want to focus on the slow dispenser? And also keep in mind too, the different number of discs that are in each dispenser. There's 8 discs in each purple one. There's 10 in the blue ones. So 20 total there, and then 9 in the yellow. So all of that is important when you're talking strategy, which then leads to your design.
Yep. And here we've got the expansion zone. So again, that one area over here,
Yep.
next to the contact zones, is the only place where you can expand horizontally beyond the 11 by 19 inch limit. So G13, we'll get to that in a little bit. The fence line, again, it's the black line along the fence. And the goal line here, you'll see, is the infinite vertical 3D projection of the regions of the floor, not just the floor itself. So if you have 2 discs stacked on top of each other, they both score. If you have a disc that is on the edge of a contact zone, but it is not touching the floor of the contact zone, it will score. If it is touching the floor of the contact zone, it does not score.
Yeah, and they do a nice job later on, a couple pages
Yep.
down, going through a bunch of those different types of examples. I don't think they left anything out. I was trying to think
No, it was
any other possibility, and they really
it was very clear. I was very happy to see that. So when discs are removed, you get a point. And they're having moved from its original position such that it is no longer fully supported by its dispenser. So they've covered the case of it being like almost out, and it's like it cannot be fully supported by the dispenser.
Yeah.
The easy way to score how many discs have been removed is you just count the ones that haven't been removed and subtract.
Yeah.
Pretty straightforward.
There's the scoring, obviously one of the most important parts of this. You'll want to go through this in fine detail, but the scoring this year I think is pretty easy. There's not a ton of different ways to score there, but obviously every single disc that is removed, 1 point. And then you put them in their corresponding goal zones, depending if it's a 2-point zone, 3-point zone, 4-point zone, or 1-point zone. Points for that, and then you've got the bonus points at the end for the expanding into the contact zones there. And so pretty simple. I think we calculated 315 as a perfect score in teamwork, right? You've got
it's basically 45 times 7.
Yep.
So because you get the 45 for dispensing them all, and then if all 45 discs are in the 40 or 4-point zone plus both robots touching, it'd be 45 times 7, 315. For skills, it'd be 270. Those scores are highly unlikely. I
hope so, man. I hope so.
I hope so. I really hope so. We'll see. We'll see how things go. So we've kind of come here a little bit to one of the first questions that I have for the Q&A. Maybe. We'll see. So SC1 scoring is immediately after the match ends, right? The intent of the rule is that robot motion cease, driver input ends at the end of the match, which is when the timer hits 0, which is when the beginning of the buzzer sounds. What happens if a team shoots a disc into the zone and just makes a mess of things after the buzzer? Is that instant DQ? And what is
rest? Once all discs, field elements, and robots in the field come to rest.
But they would have violated the spirit of the rule, and there's a rule later on, when it's over, it's over.
Yes.
By shooting after the buzzer.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
They would have affected the score.
Oh, right.
And thus would seem to elevate to a major infraction or violation, and potentially, there's no way to undo what they did to figure out what the score would have been. So Does the other team just get the new score and like, sorry if they really messed it up?
Oh man, that's a good point. I didn't think about that. Yeah, because it's bound to happen. You're going to have.
Oh, it's definitely going to happen.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know they've said in the past that like we want to give the kids the benefit of the doubt. So if it's close, you know, like you're going to like, okay, fine, whatever. But I mean, if it's like really after, you know, the buzzer is stopped and then they shoot, like I would like clarification on that. Just to know what to do, especially for like when we're hosting events, to be able to say it in the driver's meeting so that the kids aren't coming in unaware of what will happen if something like that happens. And so I can teach my kids, hey, if it's going to be 0, you know, do not shoot last second shots, like period.
Good question, man. That's a really good question.
So that's the first question that I've got for them. I don't remember the other one off the top of my head, but I assume I'll hit it when we get to it. The other important part of the scoring is that if a disc meets all the above criteria, it's not contacting a robot. It's at least partially within a goal zone, because remember, the goal zones are infinite 3D projections. It does not have to be touching the floor inside the goal zone. And a disc is not contacting the contact zone, which is defined as the floor of the contact zone, then it's scored. If it's partially within 2 goal zones, it counts for the one furthest from the fence. So even if it's just a millimeter over the line, it's going to count for the one further. So if it's on the line between the 3 and the 4, but it just ekes into the 4, it's going to be 4. But if it's on the line after the 4, it's going to be a 1. So be very careful.
I have a feeling that rule is going to be overlooked a lot at local competitions, unfortunately. Like that's where there's going to be a lot of conflict. I think like, oh, well, but the majority of this one is in, right, but. And then this year they do a really good job of going through every single possible scenario.
Yep. And understanding that, like, I love how the plates are actually on the black line, so you can see, you know, the green zone goes all the way to the edge of the black line. The yellow doesn't start until after the black line. So it should be fairly obvious. It should be easy to discern. I just hope that it is that way. I love the F and G example, because G is clearly within the 4-point zone, but F reaches over. So the one that's on top of that disc ends up being 1 point, but the bottom one gets to be the full 4 points. So, and C is touching the floor.
This page right here, you want to spend a lot of time going through all of these possible scenarios with your kids. Because this is the part that would potentially get confusing for 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds, you know. So go through all of these scenarios point by point, because they're really important.
Yep. And, you know, I said before, you know, we give the benefit of the doubt to the kids a lot. Don't overdo that, because should you get to state, should you get to worlds, they're going to be strict about it. So you want your kids to have the proper expectations going into those competitions. So just another example, it's, you know, it's over the black line, so it counts as a +2, whereas A is not over the black line. It's on the black line, which is considered the fence line. It is not a scoring zone. The fence line is not a zone or goal zone. So here is the rule about the contact bonus.
Yes. And there it even says, note, if a single robot's contacting the floor in multiple contact zones, then it's not eligible for any contact bonuses.
Yep.
And of course, the note number 2 there, contact bonuses are awarded separately per robot and then added together.
Yep. And Grant did a great job of explaining that.
Each lane of the contact zones are judged independently of each other. So if one robot touches one and one robot touches the other, then both of those get the extra point. If both robots touch the same one, then that one gets 2 extra points. The second main question is what happens if a single robot contacts multiple zones? If a single robot contacts multiple contact zones, none of them count. So you're gonna have to be precise. Yeah, I know. Literally all of you had the same first thought. Oh, I'll just lay down over all of them and it'll be fine. You think we wouldn't think of that?
Before, you know, SC5, each disc that's removed from a dispenser is 1 point. Don't damage the field.
Treat everyone with respect.
So
Program there. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
this is the one place that I'm aware of where disabled is actually used. If at any time the robot operating or team's actions are deemed unsafe or have damaged any field elements or disks, does that include knocking over a tower? The offending team may be disabled and or disqualified at the head referee's discretion. So a disablement, they have to put their controller down and not continue for a certain period of time. This is the first time I've really seen it as something that could happen in IQ. VRC, it happens somewhat regularly.
Yes.
But, well, I don't know about regularly, but it actually happens. So
I think, again,
We'll
intent is important in that, right? Like, team actions are deemed unsafe or have damaged any field elements.
Yeah.
Like,
and it's important to notice that it does say maybe.
right.
It is not hard and fast. Like,
Right.
it's not going to be, if a team knocks over a tower, they're disabled, period. So it has to be egregious. It has to be intentional, and so on and so forth. G1, treat everyone with respect. This is one of those places where it has a note. So,
Yep. We talked about that as well. And they'll receive a final warning before anything.
yep. Yep. Just follow G1.
Right. Don't get past that.
It's way easier. G2, we've
hit this one hard.
We hit this one.
I like it because, and we won't go through it right now, but I do like this because it talks about, just different scenarios. What happens if a mechanism falls off? What is okay for you to do as an adult or as the coach? What's not okay? What about programming? What about, in a specific match, what's okay for you as the adult to do? So go through that. Unfortunately, you definitely see some of those things, but they've laid it out pretty clearly here in the game manual, what's okay and what's not okay for you to do as the coach.
Yep. And there's a link to the student center policy that we talked about earlier. So it's right there. You've got no excuse.
If you have a lot of parent volunteers that help out in your organization, you need to print this out. You need to, or send them this link and go through it together. We did this last year, so as the director, I oversee a bunch of coaches and then a bunch of adult or parent volunteers underneath them as well. And so I printed this out, the student centered policy. And and I even told them, I said, I know this sounds super elementary, but we're going to go through this point by point by point by point, because I want to make it clear that we are not building the robots and that this is truly student centered. And so that's important. Your adult volunteers that you have that maybe aren't as obsessed as we are and know this stuff, they don't know that. And so it's important for them to go through that. Yep.
And G3, use common sense. This is a fantastic rule. The blue bubble is perfect.
Yeah.
If there's an obvious typographical error, like, that doesn't mean that you found a loophole. It just means that it's an obvious typographical error and it'll be fixed later.
Look at that second bullet point, man. It's so funny.
Yeah.
Understand the realities of the VEX IQ robot construction system. For example, if a robot could hover above the field for a whole match, that would create loopholes in many of the rules, but they can't. So don't worry about it.
Exactly.
A little bit of snark in that, which I love, man. I like that.
Yep. When in doubt, if there's no rule prohibiting an action, it's generally legal. Again, we said this before. They can only tell you what you must do and what you must not do. So if it doesn't fall between those, it's probably legal as long as it doesn't violate the spirit of any of the other rules.
Right. And then again, it talks about the benefit of the doubt there, which, should be the case in most cases, if it's accidental or whatever. So.
Yep, exactly.
And the robot must represent the skill level of the team. Man, there's a lot in there. Do you want to dissect any of that, or
not really? This is just one of those things where if your kids are doing the work, they understand what they're doing. If they understand what they're doing and they're documenting it, then they have record of what they did. They have proof that they did it. And when judges come and talk to them and interview them, they can back everything up. They're going to have, like, the amount of confidence that they build and the interview skills that they build in this program is incredible. So This is going to be one of those things that if you're going through and you're doing things the way they're supposed to be doing, they're documenting things the way they're supposed to, this rule takes care of itself because their skill level will be evident and they will be able to back it up with poise and confidence that a lot of people don't know that kids have.
Yes. Yeah. And you and I both have experienced, unjust accusations and things like that. And it's always cleared up through the interviews and through the notebooks. And that's always our fallback there. And, I know you've judged and I've judged as well at different competitions and it's definitely obvious. It's definitely obvious, the skill level of the teams. I ran little girls that were like first graders one time and had an amazing design and they couldn't even drive it. They couldn't. And so when I interviewed them, I just flat out asked, like, so how did you guys come up with this? And they're like, oh, we didn't, like our coach did. And I was like, okay. So what do you guys do? They're like, we just drive. I mean, they were the cutest girls in the world and they were so honest. But unfortunately, like that was something that we had to report and that was against the rules. And that robot definitely did not represent their skill level at all. And so just make sure we're staying within that. And then you're able to prove that through your engineering notebooks and your interviews.
Yep. And no, kids are generally really bad at lying. So, let's see.
Pre-match setup. Oh, here we go.
Oh, one of my favorite parts that is guaranteed to confuse some people at the first competitions.
Well, take it away then, man.
Starting zone. Do you see any highlighted areas of the field?
I do, Adam. I see a green highlighted perimeter there.
Just a perimeter, huh?
Yeah.
You see this bottom robot doesn't seem to be between any black lines.
Yeah, is he out of the starting position there?
I don't see any like yellow rectangles or anything. So
against the wall. You got to be against that 6-foot wall.
Just against the wall.
Touching somewhere. You don't have to be inside the black lines like we did this year, last year. Is this the first time they haven't?
It's the first time that I remember where it's been like this. Like literally every other has been between some black lines. There is a note here. There are no specific starting positions as long as the above criteria are met. And I'll read that here in a second. But the head referees may ask teams to temporarily move the robot between the two black lines for a size check. They should have already been through inspection, but if they've had to, if they dropped the robot and they had to put it back together, like a referee may ask, like, let me just double check that you're actually still within size constraints. But the rule here is starting position. You cannot be contacting discs or other field elements or other robots. So your robots can't be touching. You have to fit within 11 by 19 by 15 zone. So no higher than 15 inches, no taller than that. And that will be the configuration that's checked during inspection. And you have to be contacting the inner wall of the field perimeter. So not the top of the wall, not the outside of the wall, the inside of the wall. And that's it.
That's it.
So one thing that I wish they had done with these robots is have one of them diagonal.
Oh, yeah.
There's nothing here that says you have to be flat against the wall.
Right.
So you could be turned, you could be diagonal as long as something is touching that wall. According to these rules, that would be legal.
You could be fully sideways too, as long as you're touching the wall.
Yep. And
this really is the easiest starting position that we've ever had.
Yep.
I think it's definitely going to be the most confusing for people because it's so easy. Like, well,
yep.
Okay.
Yep. But I really like it, especially for if you have to rescue your robot and you got to bring it back to a starting zone. Like you just have to be touching the back wall. It doesn't have to be where you started. It doesn't have to be any specific square on the field. Like just get it back to the back wall. You're good to go.
Same with programming, man.
Yep.
Like that makes things pretty easy there too, because you just stick it against the wall. Now you'll probably want to use the black lines as guides and all that stuff. But
sure.
But yeah, there's no specific place you have to be. Just touch the wall.
Yep. And that's really all there is to that.
Yeah.
So we've already kind of talked about driver switch. That hasn't changed between 35 and 25 seconds remaining. Again, at Worlds, there were disqualifications handed out if they did not do this. So be sure that you do it.
Yep. And of course, there's that note there back to, I think we talked about this. If only one driver is present there,
Yep.
it's up. Then, unless of course the team has not exercised the allowance in G4, then this rule still applies, and they must cease their robot after 35 seconds, which we had that happen to us. One of our alliances at Worlds did not have the exception. One of their partners just didn't show up for our match, and so they had to stop at 35, which is a total disadvantage for us. But
that's a bummer.
Yeah, big bummer.
So
what else? Sorry, go ahead.
I would say, although in pitching in, there were some teams that were done in 35 seconds. So, like, maybe it would have been okay.
Yeah, that wasn't them. It wasn't.
Yeah.
Driver robot, stay in the driver's station. Yeah, because I think a couple years ago, was it Rise Above, where you had full access around the whole thing, right? For driving, you could just...
if you were doing skills, they allowed you to, yes. So for the live remote skills, they allowed that. Not so much for anything else. Well, probably live remote teamwork too. LRT.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Discs that leave the match will not be returned.
Yep.
It's pretty standard there as well.
Yeah, it's become standard. I honestly think crossover is the only time that we've ever returned things to the field.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the only time I remember. Keep your robot together. Can't intentionally detach. I know there was a couple of prototype videos where their arm extended and it was detaching, and it's like, this is a prototype. It's not going to be like that in the future. But just know that if you didn't know that ahead of time, you can't detach part of your robot intentionally. If it breaks unintentionally, like, that's not that big a deal. Please don't damage the field. Don't knock over the dispensers. Like, I know it's going to happen, but please try not to. So this kind of answers my question from earlier. Any field damage which results in discs becoming removed is inherently score affecting. Therefore, if it was accidental, they may choose to issue a match replay in lieu of a major violation. So as long as it was obvious that it was unintentional, then yeah. But don't expect to be able to ram a tower over and get a match replay because you didn't get quite the start that you wanted. Like, that's going to be a DQ. I really get the impression going through this that they've really put a lot of thought into a lot of the corner cases.
Yeah. I mean, they have a whole year to really do it, probably even longer, actually. Horizontal expansion is limited. The only time that you can go beyond the 11 by 19 is if you're contacting the expansion zone. What about this? Note, there are no restrictions on vertical expansion.
Nope.
That's a big one.
You can be as tall as you want to be.
Yep. After the start of the match. You have to start within the 15
Correct.
inches. The match begins. You can flip up to 16 feet if you want to.
Yep. So if you want to build a robot that holds all 45 discs in a single stack cartridge, knock yourself out. It's going to be great. Or if you want to make it so that your arm for your contact zone expands right at the beginning.
Yeah.
And then at the end, it just falls and hits. Like, you could totally do something like that too.
Yep.
Might make it a little awkward driving, but you do you.
You have to have a pretty skinny and small drivetrain too. So, what else do we have?
So this G14, don't cross the fence line. So that's the black line here until contact. So you have to be contacting the expansion zone, which is this A here. So if you expand outside here, that's going to be a violation.
Yeah.
So you got to have, at least part of your robot contacting the zone in A.
Yeah.
So, like, this is fine. This is not fine. Yep. Once the discs have crossed the fence line, can't touch them. You can shoot other discs into them.
Yeah.
But not with the robot. Like, you can't touch them with the robot.
discs go under the fence, not over it. That's obviously an important distinction, and I think it even says that in the video. I'm kind of curious. You've played with it. I haven't. How do the discs slide? Do they slide pretty well on the fields? Is there going to be some variation from field to field?
There will absolutely be variation from field to field. Some fields are cleaner than others. Some fields are built out of newer parts and older parts combined, so you may have some dead spots inside of the field. It's going to be crazy.
Yep.
It's going to be one of those games where it's probably as frustrating as it's exciting.
Yes, I agree. I like this. Please don't overthink this rule.
Yep, no dump bots.
If you think you have found one, it will probably be made illegal in a future game manual update. In other words, just stick it under the fence.
Just put it under the fence. Yep. And one thing to note, that the PVC pipe is roughly 2 discs off the floor. Okay. So you can fit 2 discs underneath it. They don't really fit under like the black collars that are holding the PVC pipes together, but they do fit underneath the other side. So you could technically shoot 2 at a time. Whether that's a good idea or not, I'll leave up to you. But
all right, so we've hit a lot of these rules, and we still have a lot more left to go. We don't want to make this video 5 hours long and straight. So we're going to make a cut right here, and then we will post another video following up with section 2, the robot, and all those different types of inspection rules and limitations and things like that. So we will take a cut here, and we will dive back in just a second.
Yep. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you in the next one.